Good day everyone, I am Hikirut Dayong, and this video I am going to talk about the Hebrew literature, specifically the nature of Hebrew language, poetry, and prose, and also the masterpieces of Joe. So first, let's define first the Hebrew language. So Hebrew language is a Semitic language in Northern Central, or also known as the Northern Western group. So it is closely related to Phoenician and Moabite, with which it is often placed by the scholars of Canaanite subgroup. So Hebrew language was used by the Palestine in the ancient times, and it was supplanted by the Western dialect of Aramaic beginning about 3rd century BCE. So the language continued to use as a liturgical and literary language, but however, it was revived as a spoken language in 19th to 20th centuries, and now ginahimo siya or declared siya as an official language sa Israel. So, and Hebrew language have 4 major periods. So first is the biblical or classical period. So the Hebrew language in biblical or classical period was used until about 300 century BCE, in which most of Hebrew Bible, or yes, the Old Testament, is written by in Hebrew. Second, we have Mishnaic or Rabbinic. So Hebrew, the language of the Mishnah. Mishnah is a collection of Jewish tradition or Jewish laws. It was written about 200 CE. So this form of Hebrew was never used as a spoken language among Mishnah people. Third, we have medieval Hebrew. So from about 6th to the 13th century CE, when many words were borrowed from Greek, Spanish, Arabic, and other languages. And lastly is the modern Hebrew. So the language of Israel in modern times, like what I said earlier, Hebrew is declared siya as official language of Israel. So generally, ang mga scholars nag-agree po sila nga ang pinaka-oldest nga language in Bible is the Hebrew. Example lang niya is kanang sa Song of Deborah in Judge chapter 5. So now we're done talking about the Hebrew language. Let's proceed to the Hebrew poetry. So what is Hebrew poetry? So Hebrew poetry, or the Hebrew Bible, contains a wide variety of writing styles. So it categorized generally with two terms. First is the poetry, and the other one is the prose. So while the distinction between these two is sometimes blurred, but still it is generally reckoned that at least 50% of the Old Testament is in the form of poetry. So we have 3 types of Hebrew poetry. First is the lyrical poetry. So lyrical poetry is a poetry associated with singing. Yes, it is highly prominent in expressing personal thoughts, experiences, and emotions. Like for example, the song that is composed by Miriam, the victory song rather. Mabasa siya sa Exodus 15 verse 1 to 21. So monong time nga they were delivered from the annihilation of Egyptian. And the second one is the lament song of David. Mabasa po siya sa 2 Samuel 1 verse 17 to 27. So mo na time nga si David is nabalaan niya nga patay na si Saul o si Jonathan. So third, we have prophetic poetry. So prophetic poetry utilizes vivid imagery and symbolic language rather. So it includes threats, judgments, laments, salvation, visions, and yes. And usually kasagaran mga example sa prophetic poetry is sa writing ni Isaiah, makita po siya sa Micah, naapod siya sa Psalms. And now we're done with the types of poetry and the definition of Hebrew poetry. So now let's proceed to the main features of poetry. So we all know that poetry, pag may poetry, gagamit kita og mga figurative language, tama ba? Yes, like for example, mga metaphor, mga simile, mga onomatopoeia, mga literary devices, di ba? So, doon na siya nga to, but ang main feature, or ang 3 main features of Hebrew poetry is, una, parallelism. So when we say parallelism, it is the repetition of idea using different but similar terms. For example, in Psalm 27 verse 1 to 3, kanadra ang mga verses, if makakuan mo, tanawan na lang ninyo, is verse 1 and 3 is nag-same na sila og kanang gigamit nga parallelism, types of parallelism, rather it's synonymous parallelism. And in verse 2 is antithetical parallelism. So, second, we have condensed language. So, when we say condensed, mga pinaikli, di ba? Mga pa-shorten, ana. So, condensed language is a minimal use of words to express idea, often omitting conjunction articles and relative pronouns. Ellipsis or gapping is common. So, di ba tayo yung makakita o mga conjunction sa mga poetry. Samot na sa Hebrew poetry. Kasagaran nilang dili kaayo magamit is ang word nga and. Yes. And. So, last, we have the use of imagery. So, Hebrew poetry, frequent use of similes and metaphors to create vivid words picture. Like for example, in Psalms 1 and Psalms 18 verse 2. So now that we're done with the types of poetry and its main features, let's proceed to Hebrew prose. So what is prose? Prose is a non-poetic writing in Hebrew. So it includes novel, short stories, essays, and other narrative or expository forms. So it follows regular grammar and syntax rules, and allows for a wide range of topics and themes in Hebrew literature. Mo ang difference nila ni poetry because si poetry is gagamit siya og mga literary devices or sa pa mga sugarcoating words, di ba? While si prose naman is dili siya magamit og ana ipangalanan nato si prose as straight forward. Ano, walay mga sugarcoating nga panghitabo, walay mga pabulaklak na mga salita. Ana, kuan siya kanang fact na fact. So, unite types of poetry, not types of prose. So, first is narrative prose. So, it focuses on storytelling and providing information about events. Like, for example, is the Torah. So, ang the Torah is, it is the first 5 books in the Hebrew Bible. So, if ako na sa'yo, gikan siya sa Genesis to Deuteronomy. And if yun ang basahon dira ang part is, makita nyo nga, puros mga mga events in life, diba? Creation, oh, yes. And second, we have prophecy. So, prophecy prose, it conveys messages from God. So, kanina nag-example na ako sa ang writing ni Isaiah as the prophecy poetry, di ba? But usually, matawag ang writing ni Isaiah as prophecy prose or prose. Yan na siya. Okay, third, we have wisdom literature. So, it employs proverbs, sayings, poems, and stories. Like, for example, is Book of Proverbs. Yes. And last is the Midrash. So, Midrash, it comprises interpretations and elaborations on biblical text. More than discussing the nature of Hebrew language, prose, and poetry. So now let's move on to the masterpieces of Jews. So Jewish masterpieces encompass a broad range of artistic and literary works that reflect the rich cultural heritage and historical experiences of Jewish communities. So during the times, nakan sila yung mga famous works na, but nag-cite na ko 5. So first we have the Talmud. So the Talmud emerged in the 1st century CE. Talmud compiling a rabbinic teaching. So it comprises the Mishnah. Mishnah is the Jewish laws. And Gemara is the commentaries on Mishnah. So the Talmud has 2 main versions. First is the Jerusalem Talmud, which is called as Yerushalmi. And second is the Babylonian Talmud, which is called as Bable. So next we have the Night. So Night is written by Elie Wiesel, and it was published in the year of 1956. So the novel, namely Night, it is a Wiesel account of his experiences in Nazi during World War II. So it explores the theme of faith, humanity, and survival. So next we have the Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. So it was written also during the World War II, no? So Anne's writing revealed the thoughts and emotion of a young girl who went hiding. So a little background about ano nila is kaning a Diary of a Young Girl is a Jewish girl. Is a Jewish young girl nga nagtago together with her family. Kaya katong mga time during Nazis, during sa World War II, is grabe ang mga violence, di ba? So, kung sa makita is death. So, that is why tago-tago ng tago. So, fourth, we have The Chosen by Chaim Potok, or Potok. Okay, so the story unfolds in Brooklyn from 1944 to 1950. So, The Chosen, it was the story of 2 teenagers from different religious backgrounds and became close friends. So, the novel explored faith, friendship, and complexities of Jewish identity. So lastly, we have Marc Chagall. So Marc Chagall is a master of color and symbolism. So Chagall's works blends elements of Cubism and Surrealism. So Chagall's use of bold and dreamlike color is a whole mark of his artistic style. So his paintings often incorporate Jewish folklore, biblical scenes, and personal memories. So mo to siya ang mga famous works or mga masterpieces of Jews. So remember, daghan pa siya, but I only cited 5. And I think that would be all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our topic for today is all about the Hebrew literature. For today's discussion, we will talk about the stories of creation, the Psalms 23, and the Ecclesiastes. So I know that we are all very familiar with these Bible stories because since we are young, we already hear these stories from our parents, grandparents, and everyone in the community. These topics are very familiar, are very famous and popular in our world, right? Yes, because these stories talks about how the world was created by God, how the Lord loved his creation, the humanities, and everything he created, how he forgave our sins when our parents Adam and Eve are tempted by Satan, and how he guided us and protected us in our everyday activity. When God created the world, it only took him 7 days to complete it. So let's start with the storytelling in the day 1. In day 1, God created light and separated the light from darkness, calling light as day and darkness at night. During the second day, God created the expanse to separate the waters and called it skies. So on the second day, God created the skies. On the third day, God created the dry grounds and gathered the waters, calling the dry grounds land and gather waters seas. On the day 3, he also created vegetation. These are the plants and trees that we can see in our environment. On day 4, God created sun, the moon, and the stars to give light to the earth and to govern and separate the day and night. These would also serve as sign to mark seasons, days, and years. On the 5th day, God created living creature of the seas and every winged bird, blessing them animals to fill the earth. Also in the sixth day, during the sixth day, God also created man and woman, which is our ancestors, Adam and Eve, in his image to commune with him. He blessed them and gave him every creature and the whole earth to rule over, care for, and cultivate. On the seventh day, God has finished his works of creation, and so he rested on the seventh day, blessing it and making it holy. So all in all, God created everything that we can see around us, especially us as humans, just in 7 days. On the day one, he created the night and day. On the second day, he created the sky, separating it from the seas. On the third day, he created the land and the waters. On the fourth day, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and everything, the trees and vegetables that we can see in our environment. On the fifth day, he created the animals that can be seen in the wind, flying around, and in the oceans and bodies of water. While on the sixth day, he created us as human beings. And on the last day, during the seventh day, God rested. That's why we also have a resting day or a Sabbath day called by everyone, which is the Sunday, which is our Adlaw nga Tigpapahulay. Now that we are done with the stories of creation, I will not further discuss it because I know that each and every one of us has a knowledge about the story of creation. Now that we are finished with it, let's proceed to the story of Psalms 23. Psalms 23 is a profound testament of God's loving care, guidance, and provision for his people. It is an assurance that no matter how difficult or dark the circumstances may be, we can always find peace and strength in the Lord. As we trust in God and follow his guidance, we are reminded that his goodness and mercy are everlasting, and that we can look forward to an eternal dwelling in his presence. In verses 1 and 2, this talks about the divine shepherd. As what we can read, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." In these verses, King David says that God is like a shepherd who provides everything that his sheep need. He highlights God's divine provision and care, giving a sense of tranquility and abundance. In verses 3 and 4, it talks about the guiding path and valleys of shadows. It says, "He restores my soul. He leads me in path of righteousness of his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valleys of shadows of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Verses 3 and 4, King David recognizes God as a restorer of soul and a guide along the righteous path. He speaks of faith and courage in the face of darkness and fear, asserting that God's presence is a comforting reassurance. Verses 5 and 6 talks about anointing, abundance, and everlasting hope. It says, "You prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflow. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." This verse, King David describes God's favor, symbolized by a feast prepared amidst of post and head anointed with oil. The overflowing cup represents abundant blessing. He ends with a conviction in God's unending goodness and the promise of an eternal dwelling with the Lord. That is the story, the things behind the story in the Psalms 23. Now that we are done with Psalms 23, let's talk about another Bible story, which is the Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is one of the most intriguing Bible books of the Old Testament, written by son of David, King Solomon. It is part of the Hebrew wisdom literature that explores the meaning of life and the nature of human existence. The book of Ecclesiastes was structured and divided into three parts, which part 1 introduces the teacher, part 2 are the details, the words of the teacher, and part 3 it represents the author's reflection on the words of the teacher. That are the three parts of the book of Ecclesiastes. There are themes that we can observe. First one is lack of meaning and purpose in life apart from God. Next one is the limitation of wisdom. The third one is enjoying God's good gifts. And the last one is fear of God. So if we read the whole book of Ecclesiastes, these are the themes that we can observe and written in this book. All in all, this Bible stories taught us that God created everything with purpose. He loves everything that he created, that even humans are sinned, he still loves us. He even protected us and keep guiding us all the time. Therefore, we do not have to worry about everything because he is always there for us. All we need to do is to trust in him, fear God, and follow his commands. And that would be all. I hope that you enjoy the story. That ends our storytelling. I know that you all have prior knowledge about the stories of creation, Psalms 23, and the Ecclesiastes. But I still hope that you learned a lot from this discussion, and always remember to trust God no matter how difficult life that would be. And that would be all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Generous M. De Castro, and my topic for today is all about the powerful story. The story of Joseph, the story of Ruth, and the story or the parables of Good Samaritan. This is under the Hebrew literature, topic 4. So now let's proceed to the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph talks about the 12th son of Jacob. This can be found in the Genesis 37 to 50. Jacob favors his younger son the most, which is Joseph. That time, he gives a colored cloak, and that's the reason why his other brother is jealous to him and betrayed him by selling him into the slavery in Egypt. In Egypt, he faces a lot of challenges and a lot of hardship, and even the accused of wife of Potiphar that he rapes her. But the steadfast faithfulness and trust to God is still there. He didn't even ask or question his trust to God when he faces those challenges and those hardship. The faithfulness remained there, and those faithfulness help him. By what? Joseph helped the Pharaoh by having the ability to interpret dreams. Those challenges, those hardship, make him have the ability to interpret dreams. He saved the Egypt that time from famine. Famine is a shortage of food that mainly caused by drought and war. This time, even though he's betrayed by his family, his brothers, he's still reunited with them when he saw that they need him the most. They bring his family in the Egypt. And they forgive his family, despite of a lot of what they did, despite of everything that he faces due to betraying, due to betrayal, still forgive them. He forgave his brother because he thinks that he will not in that position, he will not in that power if he didn't betrayed by his brother. This story teaches us or reminds us that God's purpose can prevail even in a difficult situation. He's always be there to help us whatever happens. This story is not just about Joseph. This teaches us that our strong trust to God will help us to a good future. So now let's proceed to the story of Ruth. The story of Ruth is a Moabite woman who showed remarkable loyalty and faith. When her husband and his father-in-law died, she chose to follow her mother-in-law Naomi, who is also a widow, to a foreign land. That foreign land is called Bethlehem. That called foreign land for her as she came from a Moabite, or now called Jordan. Even though she is told to go back to her own land by her mother-in-law, she just replied, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from the following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God shall be my God." This can be found in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16. She chooses to accompany her mother-in-law despite of the land, despite of the belief. They are not the same belief. She didn't leave her even she had different belief that time. And the redemption happened when she met another man named Boaz who helped her and married her. Her faith and hard work lead to her becoming part of the lineage of King David and ultimately Jesus, as Ruth and Boaz has a son named Obed. He is a grandfather of King David. This story highlights God's grace and acceptance of those who are different from the country where Ruth came from and from the belief that they are not the same, but still, the grace of God is still there. Her faith didn't fade, and also, the God helped him or help her. This story highlights God's grace and acceptance of those who are different. Also, this story reminds us that God's love is inclusive, and that even in difficult times, we can find purpose and blessings. Now we are done discussing the story of Ruth, the story of Joseph. Now we are down to the parables of Good Samaritan. What is the meaning of parables? The parables are the stories that use simple situation to teach deep spiritual truth. This is the way how Jesus Christ started telling to teach a moral lesson. The parables of Good Samaritan is all about the traveler who is robbed and left dead. A priest and a religious leader just passed by, ignoring the robbed traveler. But a Samaritan, who is someone who usually considered an enemy, stopped to help. These parables teaches us that our neighbor isn't just someone we like, but someone is need who can show compassion to us. These parables of Good Samaritan will teach us that helping is a choice. What you are, who you are, is the intention is the matter the most. Your good intention is the things that matter the most, and that will matter. These stories, from the story of Joseph, the story of Ruth, to the parable of Good Samaritan, this story came from a Bible, offer us a timeless lesson about faith, redemption, and God's love. This reminds us that even in the face of adversity, God's purpose can prevail. His love extends to all. May we be inspired by these stories to live lives with faith, compassion, and loyalty. That would be all. Thank you and God bless.
Everyone, I am Lisa Domingo, and I'm going to discuss the parable of last seed, the parable of prodigal son, and the parable of talents. So first is the parable of the last seed. So Jesus say, when you are invited of any man to a wedding, do not sit down in the highest place. Perhaps a more honorable man than you has always been invited. It is possible that the one who invited you called to him and tells him to give the more honorable man to the highest place. Then you will, with shame and embarrassment, take the lowest place at the temple. So when you are invited to a special event, go to the lowest place. When the one who invited you comes and tells you, friend, go up higher. So then shall you have a good opinion from those that are in the group. So whatsoever exalts himself shall be brought to a low state of being humbled. The one that is already humbled shall be exalted. So the parable of the last seed. This parable teaches us about humility and how to act when we're given an honor. Imagine you're invited to a big party. You might be tempted to choose the best seat right away, but Jesus says it's better to choose a seat at the back. Why? Because if someone more important than you arrives, the host might ask you to give up your good seat. So that would be embarrassing. So by sitting at the back, you show humility. If the host sees you being humble, they might even ask you to move to a better seat later. So this way, you gain a respect from everyone at the party. So the parable teach us that being humble is better than being proud. So when you are humble, we're less likely to be embarrassed and more likely to be respected by others. So next is the parable of the prodigal son. So in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells that well-known parable of the prodigal son. A certain man had two sons. A younger son asks her father to his inheritance, then squanders it recklessly as he lived a life of indulgence. When nothing left of his fortune, he is forced to work as a hired hand for a pig farmer. He is so destitute that he longs to eat the food of the pig. Realizing that his father's servant have better working condition, he resolved to return to his father, beg for forgiveness, and ask to be his servant. However, upon arriving at his father's house, he is welcomed in a loving arms. His father is overwhelmed with joy at his son return and holds a feast in his honor. However, the prodigal son, older brother, who has remained serving in his father's house, does not share his father's joy. Instead, he is jealous that his father has not honored him. His father argues him not to resent his father, but to instead be happy for him. So the parable of the prodigal son, this story is all about a father who has two sons. The younger son has to his share of the family wealth early and leave home to spend it all fun things. He ends up with nothing and has to work for a pig farmer. He feels so bad that he decides to go back home and ask his father for forgiveness. When he gets home, his father is so happy to see him that he throws a big party. So the older brother is angry because he thinks that his father is treating the younger son better than him. The father tells the older brother to be happy for his father because he was lost and now found. So the story teaches us that God is always when someone comes back to him, even if they done wrong things. It also shows that we should be happy for others when they do things even if they don't understand why. Let's proceed to the next parable, which is the parable of the talents. So a rich man delegates the management of his wealth to his servant. He gave 5 talents, a large unit of money, to a first servant, then 2 talents to a second servant, and 1 talent to the third. So two of the servant earn 100% return by trading with the funds, but the third servant hides the money in the ground and earned nothing. So the rich man rewarded two who made money, but severely punished the servant who did nothing. So the parable of the talents is a story about a man who gave his 3 servants different amount of money to take care while he is away. So the first 2 servants use money to make even more money by buying and selling things. Then the third servant is afraid to do anything with the money, so he just hide it. When the man comes back, he is happy with the first 2 servants because they used the money wisely. He is very upset with the third servant because he didn't even try to do anything with it. So the story teaches us that we should use what we have been given, even it's just a little, to do good things. We should not be afraid to try new things and use our talents to help others. So that's all my